Okay, I am recording it. I am host, so even if your internet goes down, I got you, girl. Otherwise, you run it, okay?
Thank you so much.
You are welcome.
Allison, I got some extra help, which I desperately needed.
So will she do that for the next 2 sessions also?
Yep.
Okay. So Heidi, you may just want to mention that there will be a screen sharing switch. Right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
I've got this.
Yeah. Kay's a pro. She's nothing like me, Allison.
No, that's fine.
Everyone who's on, there's just some tips for using Zoom here. And then we've got about 5 minutes until 10 o'clock. And so we'll start then. But if anybody, for any reason, wants to test your microphone or anything like that, now's the time. Or if anybody wants to show their faces for just a minute, we can say hello.
You are so very welcome. Hello.
Hey, Brian. Where nobody else is going to share their screens with me so I can say hello.
I don't have a camera on my home computer.
Oh, there we go.
There's some.
Hello. I'm really excited everyone was into this. There are like 27 people that wanted to be a part of it.
I would have hoped there would have been 30 or 40, honestly, but
yeah, we had a lot of people who had some conflicts, but were still interested in the recording. So I'm, sometimes I complain a lot about the way we have to work nowadays, but some of these things have made it easier for us to continue to share this stuff. So
silver linings, man, silver linings.
Totally.
I would be interested to know if there's a way we can figure out how many times people view the recording, just to get a feel for that. I don't know if there's a way to do that though.
I have some little tech specialists here in my office that help me out with that sort of stuff, so I can ask them.
Yeah, it would be really nice to know.
Yep, they've been recording our conservation speaker series events and then posting them, and I think in some way getting feedback. So I'm sure.
Are they posting them on YouTube or?
Yeah, they're just posting them on our YouTube channel.
We should share those on the EO page and the Facebook page too.
Yep, I think they just got them worked out last week. Okay. Got about 2 minutes left. I'm gonna scroll down here.
I'll just jump in and say something. In these 2 minutes, if you don't have access to the handout that was sent out, now would be a good time for you to either print that out, or if you can bring it up on another screen, so that you have that available. I'll be referring to that.
Yeah, Allison did a great job of making that handout. I looked through that and it was really helpful. Well, since we have 1 minute left and we have a couple people trickling in, I'll just introduce myself for those of you on the call that maybe I haven't met. I know I've seen most of you, But my name's Heidi Fleury, and I work at the Lake County Conservation District. And right now, I'm the president of the Montana Association of Conservation Districts employee organization, which is the EO, as everyone knows it. And we're really focusing this year on doing some practical technical skills trainings like this. And I was lucky enough to be a part of Allison McCarthy's class at our local community development center about 3 years ago, I think. And she totally changed the way that I thought about QuickBooks because I'd never used it before to this extent. And so when we were talking about tech trainings, I was like, oh my gosh, I wonder if Allison could make us a conservation district specific training. And she did, which was amazing. And so this is what this is. And now, since I think it's 10 o'clock. Oh, we have one person who's having trouble getting in. Since it's 10 o'clock, we'll just start really quickly and say that I am going to be the moderator. So I'll be looking over the chat box and I'll be looking at oh, I had my little Zoom thing up there. Oh, well. I don't know if you guys have used the raise hand function, but if Allison is going along and you have a question, she'll go over all this stuff with you. But you can raise your hand and I will make sure she sees that. And then if you have any questions, you can put those in the chat box. Or if you need a little more clarification, we can always have you come up and talk out your question with Allison. And so the one thing that we all need to make sure is that we keep ourselves muted. And that will help a lot of background noise, and that'll just help us keep this moving. Because we just have 2 hours today, and then we have 2 hours on Thursday and Friday. And then in the future, we're going to get together and have an in-person training with Allison. So this is a spot to start to get your head wrapped around QuickBooks, and then we'll be able to dive into it more over the next couple days. So without further ado, I think I can turn this over to Allison.
Okay, perfect. Great. I want to thank you, Heidi, for passing this opportunity along to me. I'm looking forward to it. And just a couple quick things that I want to make clear. So Heidi will be moderating the chat window. So Heidi, you need to just unmute yourself and make sure that I respond to a question that you're seeing there. So I'm pretty much going to be focused on content. Also, pretty soon, Heidi, you're going to stop your screen share so that I can share my screen and bring up my QuickBooks company file. So I developed this class with knowledge of how to set up nonprofits. I am not technical in terms of what your terms are with your conservation districts. So please laugh out loud at me when I don't use the right language. So nonprofits generally are set up very similarly, and that's what I'll be covering today. And so Heidi, can I share my screen?
Yeah, I don't know, Kay, can you help out with this? There we go.
So can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So
and wait, hold on for just 1 second. I'm sorry. Are we recording right now? Okay.
Yes, we are.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No problem. So we're starting by looking at the course objective page in your handout. And what we're going to cover in today's section, I'm going to go through that content pretty quickly just to set some expectations. What you're looking at right now, and you can tell by looking at the very top bar, it's a blue bar at the top of the screen. And good. I am in a...
You're having trouble getting it?
I'm in a training file that I created actually from a conservation district QuickBooks file. So some of the things that you're going to see, I think, will look familiar to you, and some things may not be quite perfect in this file, and we'll talk about a few things. that are good learning moments for us. So I will explain to you how I quickly created this company file a little bit later from an actual working QuickBooks file. I am in QuickBooks Desktop Pro 2020. That is the type of software that I'm using, the type of Intuit QuickBooks software. I'll talk about one choice that you have to make shortly. And of course, we want to be aware of what version of QuickBooks we're in. And again, I'll talk about that briefly a little bit later. In terms of this training file, I basically changed the names to protect the innocent. So I didn't actually bring over the customer name list or the other name list when I did my utility command to create the file. So hopefully I'm not giving any privy information out there into the world. And if I am, I apologize for that. One thing again that I want to say at the get-go, unfortunately, I will not be able to address payroll questions. And I know several of you had those questions. As you know, if you are running payroll in QuickBooks, it's kind of an expensive thing to keep going. So I don't have an active training company file. I used to, but there just wasn't enough demand for me to keep up with that annual expense with payroll. Also, in terms of questions, so Heidi is going to be moderating and she'll interrupt me and let me know that a question has come in. And I want you to ask the kinds of questions as I'm going through the content like this. Can you please clarify that? I don't understand. Could you please repeat that transaction? I need more clarification. So very content specific questions, please interrupt me so that you get those answered right away. So if they're exactly connected with the content that I'm covering, please ask those questions. If you happen to ask a question that's sort of a redirect question, a question like, you know, I don't set my grantors or grants up as customer jobs. We set them up this way. Is it okay to do it that way? That is kind of a redirect question. And I would hope that you would save that to the question and answer period that I'm going to try to protect at the end of this 2-hour session. So that's how I kind of see some of the ground rules running today. And again, I see lots of chats coming through, and I'm not sure if those are questions or if they're connection issues. So until Heidi, you interrupt me, I'm just going to keep marching on through the content so that we make the best use of these 2 hours. So we're just going to talk about in this first session some very basics of QuickBooks. I'm going to run through this pretty quickly. So again, stop me if you have questions. Then we're going to talk about the backbone of QuickBooks, which is the chart of accounts. We're going to talk about setting up donors, grantors, and grants, and how to do that with your customer job list. We'll also take a peek at the multiple entry list and also the customer type field and get some ideas on how and why you might want to use that. At the end of today's session, the last topic before the Q&A is going to be using classes to track your programs. And so we'll talk about that terminology as we go through class. So those are the course objectives for today's class. And with that, then I am just going to move to page 1 in your handout. It has a heading up at the top. It's called Session 1, and then you'll see a heading QuickBooks Basics. So one thing that nonprofits have a decision point to make with QuickBooks is, do they want to use standard QuickBooks Pro? And that is, in terms of the desktop version, sort of the entry-level version, the least expensive version that you have in terms of purchasing. There is a product line in the Intuit line of QuickBooks called QuickBooks Premier, and some of you may have that product. It is more expensive, and QuickBooks Premier, when you install that, it allows you to make an industry-specific choice upon installation of that licensed version. And that product or industry choice you have available to you is for nonprofits. So a lot of nonprofits do buy that more expensive Premier version. And when they select nonprofit, what happens is the application customizes itself to meet the nonprofit need. So there may be more examples of class tracking included in that company setup. The chart of accounts is very specific to a nonprofit setup. You will also have access to more nonprofit specific reports. And I've given you some examples there. For example, customer terminology might change to donor, member kind of terminology. Reports available to you would be from your own selection from the reports command on the menu bar. You'd have nonprofit available. And some of those reports would be donor contribution summary, donor grants report, budget versus actual by donor. So basically that customization that is made to that Premier application makes it easier for some nonprofits to navigate because they can relate more to the terminology. So what we have to learn when we're using QuickBooks Pro is we just have to learn that customers by default are going to be our donors or our grantors. So we have to make that terminology shift in our own brains. And to save the money, you can see that I have put some cost information on your handout. So it may be that you just want to save that money because actually QuickBooks Desktop is getting a little more expensive year by year. And I'm sure, as you know, as QuickBooks users, Intuit is always trying to get your money, right? To order more checks, to use their online backup service. So they're really all about the money. So that's the choice that you have to make. That's what that's all about. Of course, there are many other options in terms of the Intuit QuickBooks product line. And it's my understanding that most of you are using desktop. I wanted to address the second topic here. How often do I need to upgrade? So QuickBooks Lifecycle for the Pro product line, Premier and Enterprise, those are the desktop solutions. Their lifecycle is a 3-year lifecycle. And so if you're using an online service with your licensed product, then you must upgrade in that 3-year lifecycle. And upgrading means buying QuickBooks again. They don't give you a break currently in terms of, you just have to pay $100 to upgrade. You have to buy the whole thing over again. So if you're using payroll as the biggest example of an online service, you are required to upgrade every 3 years. If you are not using payroll, and I understand that many of you are not, and you're using an outside service or an accountant to do your payroll and you're posting transactions into QuickBooks or your outside services, then you really don't have to upgrade your QuickBooks Pro product in that 3-year life cycle. Now, what you lose with that, so Intuit no longer provides product support if you're outside that 3-year window. So you lose that capability, for example, of getting upgrades to your version of QuickBooks. Now, you may not care because you have exactly what you need to do the books for your district. And so I have had people who take my classes, my QuickBooks classes, and they may say they're running, a 2010 version still, and they're just fine running that version. And so that is certainly a choice that you make. At some point, you're going to want to do some research because if your application, if your product breaks, right, you want to make sure that you can upgrade your company file to a newer version. Now, I've never really run into anybody that has had such an old version that it doesn't upgrade to a new version. And often accountants can help with that because they have multiple versions of QuickBooks running on their servers. because once you upgrade to a new version, you can't go back. And so accountants or outside services need to be aware of what version you are in so that you can hold on to that sort of historical version that you might be running on your own server or on your own computer.
Allison?
Yeah.
We have a question. If they are running Premier and when they originally set it up, they did not set it up as a nonprofit, is there a way to go back and change that without resetting everything up?
You know, that's a good question. And I would say that I would probably need to Google that. I am not a Premier user, and I would certainly think there's a way to do it. I have done numerous installations of Premiere, and that is the first question that they ask you in the newest version. They will make you select your industry type. So I'm not sure how old the version is from the person asking the question. In older versions, it used to be that you bought a specific Premier product with that industry name. So the Premier product line had, 10 different versions that you chose from. So if you specifically bought Premier for nonprofit, you didn't have to pick it. If you're in a newer version, they would force you to make that selection. So I would have to just do a little bit of research, and I would imagine the answer would be yes, or maybe there's another user out there that ran into that same question and they can help us out and post that into chat. So Heidi, if you could just kind of keep a list of these questions and email me at the end of the session so that I could answer that tomorrow morning with what I find out, I would appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Okay. At the bottom of page 1, always back up your company file, establish a routine and stick to it no matter what. So it is important to have redundancy and backup. My own company file for my own personal company, what I do is I not only back it up to the cloud, I don't use the Intuit service to do that. I just back it up to Google Drive. I also, after I complete my taxes, I make sure that I have a backup on a thumb drive, and I make sure that that thumb drive is in a safe place off-site. So you want to make sure that you have that redundancy. And in fact, this just happened to me yesterday. I also use QuickBooks to keep track of my personal finances. And for whatever reason, when I attempted to, after installing an update into the QuickBooks software, I tried to open up my personal file and I got an error. And of course, QuickBooks has a lot, with this error message, download the QuickBooks, doctor tool. And I wasn't about to do that. I had just backed up my personal file. I just restored to backup, and it basically saved my, can I say it? Ass, sorry. So backup. You never know what little glitch is going to happen. Make sure you have a routine and make sure you have redundancy with backup. I'm looking at page 2 now in the handout, and QuickBooks is a relational database. And what that means, especially when you're thinking about possibly doing things different in your company file, or maybe you'll think at the beginning of the fiscal year because you feel like your file is a little messed up because you kind of were just doing it the same way as the person before you did it, or you're making a decision at this point, possibly based on training, that you want to make a few changes in that company file. You're going to be working with a lot of lists. It is a database. The database term for list is table. And so there are lots of ways to get to the list that we'll be discussing today. There are shortcuts. I very often go to the list command on the menu bar. And so we'll be discussing the setup on these lists for your conservation districts. So a relational database means, you know, unlike Excel or Word where you have to save, you know, even that's just a good practice to have. Anytime we enter a transaction in QuickBooks, it is saved to your company file. The next topic I just want to kind of quickly go over is QuickBooks is a dual entry accounting system. And throughout the next few days that we're together for this training, I'll probably test you on this. Again, I'm really not sure what your expertise level is in QuickBooks. So this is a good thing to ask questions about if you're confused. Dual entry accounting system means for every credit, there's a debit, and for every debit, there's a credit. It goes back to the old ledger days before we had automated accounting software to use. So an example is, let's say you are invoicing, and one of my examples is one of my customers that I set up just based on the company file that I was looking at was a local fire services kind of customer. And this particular customer was invoiced, and I'll just bring up that invoice for an NTSD rental. And so we generate invoices and we use items on invoices when a customer, in this case, this local fire services customer, is going to pay us later. And so an invoice by default in QuickBooks, the two entries that are made to your chart of accounts would be one to accounts receivable because they owe you the money. And then the offset to that, the other side of that transaction, is to an income account on your chart of accounts. And we'll get to that in more detail as we discuss these different forms. Also, the other side of that is entering a bill. And I just have a bill entered. This particular conservation district has workshops and education as programs that they control. And one of the bills would be to DoubleTree, you know, a hotel, to pay for the room, right, where we had this workshop. And so when a vendor sends me an invoice, that is my bill, and if I don't have to pay it right away, what I can do is use this enter bill form. And again, what I'm focusing on is the dual entry nature of this accounting software. So when I enter a bill by default, accounts payable is hit, right, because I owe that bill. And then the associated expense, if I'm using expenses, is going to be the offset to that. And so we'll talk about some entries on these kinds of forms a little bit later. And so if that kind of terminology is confusing to you, a really good practice to do some training is when you enter some of these transactions, run some reports. You know, it's transaction entry. We're doing this so that we can have decent reports to give to our boards for tax purposes at the end of the year. And so I'll be running some of those reports throughout class. You're going to want to make sure that you're familiar with a profit and loss report for your district, as well as the balance sheet for your district. So that's why understanding this dual nature accounting system is so important, so that you understand what those reports are telling you. So I also want to talk about defaults in QuickBooks in terms of how they affect reports. And this is an accounting method called cash versus accrual accounting basis. And this is a designation, and you all may be the same, right? Because you're the same entities. And on the company file that I was looking at, it looked like the defaults were maintained at accrual basis. So cash versus accrual, you can read about this at your own leisure, and I'm just going to kind of quickly describe it in a nutshell. The example that I just gave you on dual entry accounting was an accrual-based example. So accrual is sort of when the transaction occurs, the entries are made. A cash basis accounting method is when you get paid for it or when you pay the bill. It's when the cash comes into your district or when the money goes out when you pay a bill. And that's the big difference. And one thing for you to know is it doesn't matter how you enter the transactions. It's an awareness of when you run reports. Are you looking at an accrual basis or are you looking at a cash basis? A lot of the nonprofits that I work with on an individual basis that hire me to help them are on accrual. And accrual basis, when you're doing budgets based on actuals, tend to be a little bit more meaningful when you're looking at things as accrual basis. So that's page 2, and I'm seeing another chat come through. So Heidi, just interrupt me if you need to. I'm looking at page 3 in your handout. So when we use the terminology company file, that is your QBW file. So I just want to give you some awareness of extensions in QuickBooks because that can be kind of confusing to people. So QuickBooks is a relational database, keeps your active company file in that file with the extension QBW. When we back up a file, it's a QBB backup. And that's what we restore if we needed to, just like my example from what I had to do the other day, QBB. The other, I mean, there's a lot going on here with file types. I will talk about the IIF file type a little bit later. That's the second one on your list. So that's where it is in writing, the IIF file type on an export of data. And then finally down at the bottom, I don't know if any of you are using online banking with your banks. If you are downloading transactions into QuickBooks, the QBO file type is the file type where those transactions will land. And depending on how your bank processes your downloads, so it can be bank specific. I use Glacier Bank. So when I download my files, you can do it either within QuickBooks or you can import those from the QBO that is in your download folder. So that's the file type that you'll see when you're doing downloads, bank downloads, credit card downloads. There are, if your local bank, if you're using a small local bank rather than a larger regional bank, you'll want to make sure that they have that capability if downloading is something that you're interested in. If they don't, there are third-party vendors that will convert whatever file type a bank allows you, and they will allow you to convert that. You have to pay for it into a QBO. So, and I guess that's a lesson, you know, never feel like you're at a dead end. Like the question that I couldn't answer earlier, you know, I'm sure there's a way to do it. Do I exactly know the method? No, but I certainly can Google it and find out. You know, online banking is a choice. Some people feel like it saves them time, and some people feel like it's a time waster. So it's something that you can set up and try, but you know, you don't have to keep doing it if you find that it's wasting more of your time. So I just want to talk a little bit. I'm moving on to page 4, and I do see some chats coming through, and I'm assuming, Heidi, that you're still out there and monitoring those chats for me.
Yep, I've been answering them and accruing the questions for the end.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you so much. Navigating the interface is on page 4 in your handout, and I'm just going to kind of quickly go through this again, not really being privy to the expertise level that we have out there. So what we're talking about here is the menu bar, is the first bullet item at the top of page 4. And so we can go here and we can have access to all the commands, right? I can go to lists. There are a ton of lists. You can see chart of accounts here. I can also see that I have a shortcut to chart of accounts in my company page on my home page, or I'm sorry, my company area on my home page. So some of these lists that we go to often, like chart of accounts and items, we'll find shortcuts. You may decide to learn a keyboard shortcut to opening those windows if you're in there a lot. You'll notice when I go to lists and I go to customer and vendor profiles, you can see there are a lot of lists that are buried underneath that command. We'll be talking about one of those today that you may decide you might want to use, which is called the customer type list. So the menu bar is something that you may access on and off, depending on how much you use this home page view. So the home page is divided into functional groups. So what we have here is we have a pane called, you see this little tab here, and it says vendors. So this is actually demonstrating the accounts payable side of your district. When I click that button, you probably know that that brings up your vendor center. This pane in the middle is relating to your accounts receivable. And again, clicking this button is going to bring up that customer pane. And so this is often where we'll land when we're adding new customers and jobs. Those are going to be your grantors, and your grant names are going to be jobs within customer. We'll talk about that a little bit more when I get into that topic. So these are kind of quick access. I think those are nice shortcuts for you so that you don't have to go up here to customers and then go to customer center. Of course, you could learn keyboard shortcuts if that was of interest to you. You see that Control J off to the right. We have a company pane and we have a banking pane. If you're doing payroll, you'll see an employees pane, and that's where you'll access those payroll functions. What I like to review with people is the sort of the flow chart. We see these arrows on the home page, and I call following these arrows, it's like taking the yellow brick road to success. The dual nature of QuickBooks in terms of that dual entry accounting system, basically we have to, because we're not in the ledger ourselves, we have to use the correct forms in QuickBooks so that the right entries get made. And that's what these arrows are all about. If you create an invoice and you receive payment, you have to receive payment against that invoice in order to clear the accounts receivable record. We're going to talk about those processes, sort of light touches on those. You'll see enter bills, and you see the arrow. You need to pay bills. You need to use that form to clear your accounts payable record. So when we're processing things, you know, we use a lot of different forms. You know, if you are auto paying utilities or whatever for your district, or maybe the phone kind of bill or cell phone bill for your district, that may just be an auto debit in your account. You know, that's a great opportunity for a downloaded transaction, right? So that you don't have to enter it yourself. But you may be just, you know, putting that directly into your register, right? That would be a situation where you're not going to enter a bill because you don't have to create an accounts payable record for that. So in QuickBooks, we use these different forms, and what we try to do is just mimic exactly what happened. We're going to talk a lot about this sales receipt form. So when you get a grant in, you're going to be using a sales receipt form, and you're going to have items set up in order to get that grant in. And I'll explain why That's a better form to use than just going straight to recording a deposit. And so we're going to try to build on that knowledge of your customer job list are your grantors, jobs within customer are your grants. We'll be setting up items so that when you use this sales receipt form, those items will process correctly against your chart of accounts. So basically that's it. You can change views a lot. You know, my view that I like to have is I like to view this left icon bar. You'll see me demonstrate this today. As I start opening more and more windows and reports, I'll try to leverage my open window view here, which is I think a great time saver and shortcut for you, especially when you're trying to troubleshoot and resolve problems. So we're going to go ahead and look at page 5 in your handout. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about using centers. And I'm going to go to my customer center. And of course, what I'm looking at here is I'm looking at a list of my active customers. And what I'd like you to focus on a little bit here is this sort of example I have here. I haven't used it in any transactions, but you see it's a grantor name example, and then the grants are sub jobs underneath that. And as we start learning how to set lists up and learning how to get transactions input, we'll start generating reports. And one reason why we want to set up our customer job list in this way is to leverage a profit and loss report by job, reports, customer and financial, profit and loss by job report. That is going to be a report that would show you activity against a grant name or the grantor name, and it's going to show income and expense by transactions associated with that name, no matter what program. A profit and loss by class report, which we'll discuss. That's going to show you, that's a great report for you to review as the supervisor of your district, and also a report that probably your board is going to want to see, because that's going to show profit and loss by program. We'll learn that we can filter that profit and loss by program, and we can filter it to a specific job or a specific grantor name. And so this setup is gearing us up toward being able to generate the reports that you need for yourself, your board, for your grantors. So what I'm looking here is I'm looking at active customers. You can look at customers. You can use this as a filter. If there's a customer that you don't want to do business with anymore, you can inactivate them. For example, you're not getting this grant anymore, or they changed the rules, whatever, you're never going to get it again. I'm right-clicking, and you can make inactive. I'm not making anything inactive yet because I still want to use some things, but that's the same process that we would use for our vendor list, our other list, and it's a quick way to clean things up. Remember, we can't delete things from lists if there has been a transaction associated to those particular items. When you're on a specific grantor name, customer name, this is a very handy area over here to the right. And you can see by default, I'm looking at transactions that are associated to that name. So what I'm looking at here are all types of transactions. And you can also do some filtering here. and I'm looking at those transactions. The default is this fiscal year. Of course, because of tax reporting, QuickBooks is very sensitive to the dates that you put on transactions. And we need to be very careful that we put things into the right year for reporting. But sometimes that throws us, especially when we're on sort of the shoulder months of our fiscal year. We're anticipating that we would see certain transactions that aren't there, and we get that little flush of adrenaline. So always remember to take a look at the parameter that QuickBooks is using as the default for the transaction period that you're looking at. One thing that I'll also talk about a little bit later when we get into that sales receipt form, let's say you get a donation from an individual, right? An individual is giving you a donation. What we can do with that sales receipt form is we can set it up so that you can have a long text portion on that sales receipt form that allows you to send them that advice of their contribution with all the appropriate information you need to have on it for their personal tax purposes. And what's very cool is you can send that as it's set up in QuickBooks, the ability to email. You can send them an email, and this is something I use all the time. The sent email tab will keep track of the emails that you send through QuickBooks to your customers. And so that may be a time saver for you if your district is getting those kinds of individual contributions. And so we'll learn how to customize that sales receipt form. You know, there's a lot of reporting here that is available to you at the customer level. What I'm going to do is just click the edit button here. That puts me into one way to put me into the edit mode. You can see I have pretty bare bones here for my customers. And also, if it is at all meaningful to you, and I'll just point this out right here, and this may not be meaningful here, but it may be more meaningful to you at the item level, but you can actually attach pictures of things. So if there's certain pieces of equipment, you could attach that to the asset account on your chart of accounts, even if you wanted a picture of that. I hope I get this right, NTSD. Did I get that right? But you can keep those kinds of things if that's meaningful to you as attachments. Okay, so that's just a brief view of the different centers and some ideas of things for you to look at. What I'd like to jump to right now is the bottom of page 5 in your handout. You know, I alluded to this a little bit before. Often, so don't feel like you're alone out there. I work with clients that have a little bit of a mess. And they have a little bit of a mess because when they started their QuickBooks company file, they didn't have any training. A lot of times we get a job because we're good at fundraising, or we have the right connections in the community. We have the right knowledge base, right, to do our job. And we really didn't have any experience of being a bookkeeper. And so it's a lot, you know, we get thrown into it a lot because it's sort of an adjunct piece of our job description. So what if you feel like you need to start over? You know, and maybe that's a decision, you know, as you get more training, you're thinking about, you know, oh, shoot, you know, my sub-account structure is messed up on my chart of accounts, or I haven't been using class tracking and I'm not able to generate the reports that my board wants to see. And I just want to start with a clean slate. So I just want to introduce this to you quickly. This is how I created this training file so that I didn't have to do a lot of data entry. So I was in the actual conservation district file, and I went to this utility that's at the bottom of page 5 in my handout. I went to File, utilities, and I first went to export, and I picked lists to IIF files. And that was that extension I pointed out before. This is a specific Intuit interchange file type. And I can select the lists that I want to export. And I usually just drop these onto my desktop. So I can export these. Hopefully you see the window. I have a screenshot of it on page 5 in your handout. These lists will come over with no balances. And that's good if you feel like you're trying to get away from a mess, but you really don't want to do all the data entry for your vendor list, or maybe your volunteers. You've been pretty good at keeping them on your other names list. Maybe you have some cleanup to do with your customer list, but rather than inactivating them, when you bring them over with 0 balances, it's going to be easy just to delete them instead of having all that extra baggage to deal with inactive things. Same thing with your items list. Maybe your class list you want to bring over. Maybe your chart of accounts list you want to bring over, but you want to just clean it up a little bit. This is a great utility. So you export out of your company file, and then you create a new company file. And when you create that new company file, you identify in the desktop version, you would identify that you are a nonprofit, but you say you want no chart of accounts to be brought over because you're importing that chart of accounts yourself. And a few accounts will come over by default when you generate that new company file. But those you can either, they're required by QuickBooks, you can either inactivate them if you don't need to, or delete them if QuickBooks will allow you to. Once you generate that new company file, we can pretend that I'm in my sort of my blank company file. The other side of this is file utilities, and obviously I would import IIF files. I'm going to cancel here so I don't drop out of my company file. But basically at that point, that would bring me into a browsing capability.
Allison, we have a question right now.
Uh-huh.
So to clarify, when you export these lists, accounts, etc., they're saved somewhere else, but it's a fresh start on your QuickBooks account?
Correct. Correct. It's sort of like QuickBooks will export those lists that you check off that you want in your new company file. And because they're sort of exported almost in an Excel type of format, but it is a unique extension. It's sort of QuickBooks being proprietary in a way. But it's as if you're taking the data, let's say it's your vendor list. So your vendor name that you use for the list, the vendor company name, the vendor address, any additional information you had created in that vendor record will be saved in an Excel format, except it's that different extension with 0 balances. That's why it's a fresh start, but it saves you a ton of obvious data entry time.
And then we have one other, oh, I'm sorry.
Please go ahead.
There is some concern about starting anew. Should people be hesitant about starting anew, or is there, like what happens to that old customer list or your company file?
Oh, great question. Great question. So do you see, I'm going to cancel here. So my company file is named Training Montana Conservation District. And I created this company file from a company file that had a specific Montana conservation district name associated to that file. And so when I was developing the exercises and examples that we're going to get to, I would have to close my training file and reopen that actual conservation district file to sort of see how you all did a certain type of transaction. So when you create a new company file, the QBW file, it is a separate file. It's just like 2 Excel files with different names. You will always have access to your old company file. And of course, you have to have access to that because that has your historical data in it. Your new company file, you will differentiate it. If I go to company and go to my company, that's where we edit company information. And you'll have to make that company name look slightly different to you up here. Of course, that's what's going to print on forms. But what we normally do is go to that company, my company command, and we would edit the old company name and we'd call it Old Sanders County Conservation District. So it would be very evident to you when you're bringing up that old company file to look at old data, it's going to say old up here. So
Perfect. Thank
the
you.
decision to start a new company file is usually one that people embark upon at the beginning of a quarter. You know, let's say you're midway through your fiscal year and you start getting busy in the March, April, May quarter. So you could decide to do half of your year in a new file and the other half is in your old file. But that's going to be a lot of dual reporting for you, right? Or getting access to that detailed information. So what a lot of people would do is they would start at the beginning of a fiscal year so that their entire tax data would be in one company file. So there are considerations. There's a lot, and maybe that's a topic, Heidi, you and I can talk about for a future training class. A lot of decisions to make. And there are tricks for nonprofits because, of course, your grant dollars are going to cross your fiscal year. You're going to have money left over in a grant at the end of your fiscal year that you need to carry forward to your new QuickBooks company file. So there's some tricks in getting those balances across correctly. And a lot of those are using a sales receipt form in the right year so that you can get those balances into the right classes. Did that help?
Yeah, there were some other questions about maybe is there an easier way to clean up and edit without creating a new company file? And I personally have some experience with that. And it was pretty hard for me to clean up an old file that someone else had created. And so I just went with what Allison, you had said, just use your fiscal years as your changing dates. And everyone's learning a lot of information in this training and we can put it all together and you can make a plan for your next fiscal year. So that was a really good point. Thanks, Allison.
You know, in terms of cleaning up, when I'm working with a client, an individual client that has kind of a messed up company file, I think one of the bottom line decision points is, do you have confidence in the numbers? Do you have confidence that what your balance sheet and your P&L are telling you are accurate? Because we can spend a lot of time trying to clean it up. But if you're going to have that nagging feeling like you know that this number is off and you don't know why, or you can't explain it, then that's kind of an indicator that maybe you want to start fresh, because we all want to have confidence that the numbers that we're reporting out there are accurate. And sometimes it's hard to get away in that cleanup process. It's kind of hard to get away from that nagging thought that I don't have faith or trust that my numbers are accurate. Okay, are we good to go?
Yes, thank you, Allison. That was great.
Okay, so we're going on to page 6 in your handout. And this is super important. And again, I'm going to kind of show some things here. And these are learning moments. So I'm not trying to pick on anybody in terms of their individual conservation district setup. Obviously, we're just here to learn. So, what I want to do is go to the list command on the menu bar. I'm up in the upper left-hand corner of the application, and I'm going to my chart of accounts list. Remember, we talked about the chart of accounts being the backbone. And I'm going to talk about this in a little bit more detail, but what I just want to point out is numbering, because that's an important preference that I want you all to see. So I'll just mention a little bit later, you all are using the BARS, the Montana BARS accounting chart of accounts method, which has a certain numbering scheme so that you're staying kind of, your chart of account types are staying in the same numbering scheme, which help make it easier to compare, one district to another, because your chart of accounts is set up similarly. And what I want you to notice here is we sort of have kind of a different sets of numbering schemes going on. In this particular example. And I didn't fix it all, but one thing that I did fix was turning on in preferences the account numbering field. Because what I saw in this particular list, and I'll just edit and then kind of undo. I'm just right-clicking to edit an account. This particular company file initially did not have this field turned on here. I'm circling the number field, and there were a lot of duplicates because, in fact, I won't even save the changes here, but a number would be put in the account name field to get that number in there. And that kind of messes stuff up a little bit. It makes it a little harder for you to read reports. In addition to that, it doesn't allow you to change a preference in preferences that I think you all will enjoy. So I'm just going to cancel here. That's just an example of making sure that we understand the preferences that are available. Preferences is where I go to customize QuickBooks to make it work the way I want it to work, either for data entry purposes. So preferences can be navigational techniques. They can be view commands. Like a preference can be, I want to see my reminders window open when I open my company file. And they can be company-wide preferences, like this particular one I'm discussing, which is enable the account number field. So I'm just going to go to edit preferences. And I have a screenshot of this for you in your handout on page 6. I'm just assuming you can all see my screen as I roll along here. And actually, I have the general preferences. That's in the navigation bar that you see here. There are many, many preferences. I have general selected. And so for example, you'll notice on the right side of the window, these are my options. And for many of these preferences, you see my preferences tab, and then you also see the company preferences tab. So my preferences is all about when you log in, what switches are turned on and off. And of course, company preferences have to be the same for every user logging in to your company file. So this is a great one that I love to turn off. Beep when recording a transaction. Like, how annoying is that? Another one is turn off pop-up messages for products and services. You know, it won't turn everything off, but you know how you get a lot of messages from QuickBooks to buy more stuff, right? Because they want your money. That can help. Automatically remember account or transaction information, autofill kinds of options. Default, use today's date as the default, or maybe you do entry once a week into your company file based on your transactions. So you want to use the last date entered as your default. So, you know, some navigation, some just basic choices that you have generally about that. I have some of those listed, as you can see under the General tab. Consider changing some of those. I just have a few bulleted items there. I'm going to pop down to reminders. Do you see this My Preference Show Reminders list when opening a company file? I'm not sure you all are using reminders or not. I'll bring up my reminders window so that you can see what that is all about. Reminders are great. Reminders remind you of a lot of stuff. I don't have this checked here because it's not my active company file, but no harm done to check it. If I click company preferences, this is how we control how the reminders windows works for everyone. So if you're in your district, I'm kind of in the lower part of this window, circling my mouse right now. If you do enter bills, because you have terms with that vendor, you don't have to pay them right away. It helps you with your cash flow. You can only show a summary, or you can show the list of all the bills. Or you could say, I'm not that district. I don't enter bills and I don't pay bills. And that's fine, right? If you don't have vendors with terms, you could say, just never remind me of those. You can see 10 days before due date. So if there are bills out there, QuickBooks will remind you on the reminders window. And if it pops up every time you open your company, you'll remember to pay bills, as well as all these other things that you see on this list. I'm going to go to another setting, reports and graphs. I wanted to show you this. By default, I go straight to company preferences. My preferences has a few things. Prompt me to refresh. Company preferences. Remember, we talked about cash versus accrual basis. By default, summary level report basis is accrual. Now we'll see as we start generating reports that you can change that if you need to. If your district is a cash basis and you want to change the default, you certainly can here. So every time you run those summary level reports, they'll be cash basis. I'm going to go to payments. And what I'd like to kind of identify here is a couple things, and this may seem a little Greek to you depending on your experience. If you are invoicing people for things like the NTSD that I showed you earlier, when you get payment on that invoice, you can have QuickBooks auto apply that payment. Now, if you have repetitive amounts, you know, to that local fire services customer, you know, $200 multiple times on different invoices, this automatically apply payments can sometimes cause some problems because QuickBooks will first apply by specific amount. And then it will first apply it to the oldest outstanding invoice that is of that exact amount. So for a lot of customers, I say take that check mark off so that when you get payments for invoices, you yourself have to choose which one they're paying. It's whatever saves you time. Do you see this checkbox? It's by default checked. Use undeposited funds as a default deposit account too. Now, we'll see the flow and the process of that, and we'll see more undeposited funds in action, I guess. Intellectually, as a description of undeposited funds, what that is used for is it's actually a holding bucket. It's a holding account on your chart of accounts. So if you receive multiple payments, let's say in a week, and you want to group those together to make one deposit at the bank. So let's say you get some checks for donations, you get, you know, a check for some rental of some equipment that you have. So you have to clear, you've got to create those individual sales receipts, you're clearing the invoices, and at the end of the week, you want to make one deposit at the bank. That's what undeposited funds is for. It's that grouping capability, which makes your reconciliation a lot easier because you're mimicking what you did, right? You took those 3 or 4 or 5 checks, how many there are, you grouped them together and you made one deposit. If you want to be able to choose the account right on the form, let's say you really don't have, that doesn't happen in your district. You know, you get a check a week or something, and you just want to skip undeposited funds and directly deposit it in QuickBooks into your bank account. That's what that check mark is all about. And I'll show you on forms what that check mark opens up. Now, one more that I would like to show you, and this will make more sense a little bit later. It is on the, and I'm just scrolling down here, time and expense. By default, and you may have to write this down, okay? It's not on your list. So if you care about this, it's the time and expenses pick, and it's company preferences. Normally, mark all expenses as billable is checked. And I'm going to recommend that you uncheck that. And we're going to learn why later. But it's just make a note of that here, and we'll learn why later. Lastly, we're going to go to accounting. Accounting is where you use account numbers. That little problem I was describing earlier, that's where that lives. Use account numbers. When you do that, and the company file that I was in, I had to clean up the numbers that were entered manually in the account description field. But after I did that cleanup, then I could turn this on, show lowest sub-account only. We're going to talk about the chart of accounts, and sub-accounts, but in looking at this actual conservation district file, the sub-account structure can be a little bit deep. You may or may not experience that. But if you can, when you're choosing an expense account, like you're writing a check or you're in your register, once you pick that lowest sub-account, that's what you see. It doesn't revert back to the parent account. And so it's a much easier view in this nested chart of account structure. So think about that. And then, of course, this very important use class tracking. and I'm repeating myself on purpose because the language, when you have a nonprofit and you're using pro, can trip you up a little bit. Classes is the list we create to track programs. And we want to turn that on so that we can do that report that I just showed you where it lived. The profit and loss report by class report. So the word class in your brain is equivalent to your programs. Customers are your donors and your grantors. Jobs within customers are the actual grant names from that donor. So this is a very important thing to turn on. And when you turn this on, it turns on that class field for all of your forms. So we're going to talk about class lists before the day is done. I think that's all I wanted to show you in preferences. And we're going to turn to the next page, which is page 7 in your handout.
And this is just one thing that came into the chat box, Allison. And I know that we discussed that the Conservation District is not a nonprofit, but conservation districts aren't specifically nonprofits like 501c3s. You know, just so everybody knows that we didn't talk to Allison about making a training for 501c3s.
Is what I'm instructing applicable?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Is there something that I'm missing?
No, I think it's just kind of the specific distinction of us being a nonprofit in one certain way.
So when you file taxes, what is the tax form that you use?
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry.
It's a 941.
Okay, so that's for payroll.
Yep,
tax.
and so we do a report to the state. We don't have to file specific taxes.
Okay, so what kind of report is that? Is that a P&L?
It goes to the Local Government Services Bureau, and it is pretty much just a profit and loss.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you for clarifying that for me. That's very helpful. That makes your chart of accounts setup even more important, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're going to take a look at page 7. And at the top of page 7, I just want to talk a little bit about setting up users. And this lives under company and set up users and passwords. So I've just given you a little screenshot of that. I'm just going to cancel because I don't really want to get into it. I just want to remind you that if some of the districts out there have multiple people accessing a company file, it's really important that you set up multiple users. There is, and I point this out, there's an important report under reports, accountants, and taxes. It is your audit trail report. And if you have multiple users accessing the data, this report will show you what users did what transactions. And so that kind of accountability is important with multiple user access. And again, it gives you different security options as you set up those users. So if you have divided responsibilities in terms of accounts receivable and accounts payable or whatever, you can set up security to do that. Okay, chart of accounts on page 7. So this is where I just kind of talk about bars. And what I did was I just put some links in the handout for you if you were interested in going out there and looking at the numbering structure that you should be using so that your account types are landing in the right number scheme. And that was a quick thing to do. I actually did email the gal at the state in that department that came up when I was doing some research on bars. And I thought it was kind of interesting that they don't really have a QuickBooks file example that they can send showing that structure. So that was, I thought, unfortunate, but there is kind of a nice PDF file that you can download and read about that specific numbering scheme that you are required to use. One thing about the chart of accounts that I want you to think about is it really is the 50,000 foot view of your district. And when you start seeing some repetitive accounts on your chart of accounts, what that means is you're probably missing something with your setup. And let me just give you an example. It's not showing in this company file, but an example would be, I'm looking kind of in the middle of my window and I see an education expense here. And then underneath that, I see sub-accounts, workshop expenses, training expenses, and outreach expenses. So if I were seeing something on the chart of accounts, like under workshop expenses, if I were seeing sub-accounts of that were specific workshop names, then that means that I'm missing something. It means that I'm not using class tracking, because that's what classes are all about. So it may be that you would be seeing multiple line items under multiple different expense accounts. So for example, if you saw under publicity, if you saw a workshop name, like one of my workshops names is the John Muir workshop, just to fabricate a name. If I saw that under workshop expenses here, but I was also tracking some publicity expense for that workshop here, and I saw that name repeated. Do you see how my chart of accounts is starting to get junked up? It's not that 50,000 foot view that you want to see for your end of year reporting. So that's something for you to look at on your chart of accounts. And what I've given you on page 7 is I've given you a list of just a description of what account types are that you'll see on your chart of accounts, and kind of a description of what that account type represents. And at the top of page 8, what we're looking at is we're just looking at the chart of accounts. So what we're gonna just take a look at here is sub-account structure. And I'm assuming that you all know how to create new accounts. It's easy. Right click, I can create a new account. This first decision that you have to make is an important one. What type of account is it? And don't forget that as you click on these different types, QuickBooks is just going to give you a nice little example, right, of what an expense account is, a nice description. I'm going to continue. And what I'm talking about here is if I were creating a sub account, I could click here. It is a sub account of something, right? And that's how I get this indented structure. And that's what I was talking about before in terms of the hierarchy here is kind of deep, which is why that show last sub account under preferences can be helpful for you, so that in that expenses field, let's say if you're in your register or writing a check, you want to be able to see the bottom of that structure, right? Because this is going to take a lot of room up in that field. So sub account of. So easy to create. We can see that the indented structure on our chart of accounts. And one thing that I noticed in this particular file that I created my company file from is something that may work for you. It's a suggestion that I'm going to make to you about accounts and sub-accounts. And I'm just picking on this education expense structure. So when we have sub-accounts like this, you should try to stay away from using the parent account, education expense. And the reason being, and I'm just going to show this report here. Now, see how I'm just going from this month to date as the default. You can see a report basis. This is a summary level report, so it's going to be accrual. And I'm just going to pick this fiscal year. And so I've entered a few transactions in here. And what I want you to try to key in on here is my expense categories down here. Do you see education expense? And I see workshop expenses. And then see how this creeps in. Education expense other. So when you see those other names on reports, it means that you used the parent name. And this parent name, education expenses, is simply there to total the sub-accounts. So when you use the parent name, that's when other shows up. And when other shows up, usually, maybe you've experienced this, people say, well, what's education expenses other? Like, what does that mean? So what I'm going to do is do a drill down report, right? Zoom in on that amount, and I'm just double clicking on it. It was a check that I wrote. I'm going to double click on that. So what I just want you to see is, see how education expense was selected as the expense account for that item. So what I'm going to do is just put that in workshop expenses. That's what I mean by making sure you stick with the sub-account structure. I'm going to click Save and Close. Yes, I want to accept the change. Oh, it's okay. I'm just going to say yes. So now I can see that that has disappeared. And as I scroll, do you see how that education other is now gone because I selected the workshop expenses account? So be aware of that. I think that that will help you save some time. There's also an account that you can set up, and I'm not sure if I have that here. It's usually a default in QuickBooks, but you could set up a new account, and you could make it like an other expense type of an account, and you can name it, I don't know where to put this, or I have to ask, you know, what this, I have to ask my accountant where to put this. So don't just stick things in places, try to stick them in a place so that you know where to put it later, or make sure you set up the sub account that you need so that you're not getting all those others on reports. Okay, I'm jumping to page 9 in your handout. I've already talked quite a bit about this. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to my home tab. Customers are donors and grantors. Jobs are grants, maybe the years that you get those grants. I've got some examples there for you. And what I'm going to bring up is I'm going to bring up my customer center. We've seen this before. I have some examples in this training file. And what I'd like to do is I'm just going to pick DNRC, and I'm going to edit that customer name. Again, I don't have a lot filled out here. Remember, the customer name up here is what you see on your own list, and what you type down here is the actual name that would print on forms. What I want to show you here is something called the additional information tab. And I'd like to talk just a little bit about this customer type field. I showed you that earlier in training. It was on the list command, under the list command on the menu bar, customer job list. And so I have some ideas here for you in terms of customer type. And I'll show you a report that we can generate by customer type, sales by customer type. So this would be something that you might want to use so that you can see the different sources of your income. You know, how much are coming from donors or grantors, how much is coming from the state. It's sort of how you want to see a breakout of where your income is coming from. And so this is a list that you set up based on your own need. It's a list that we can filter to also, so we can drill down to different customer types. So I'm just going to cancel here because I didn't make any changes. And the other thing that I want to show you is on the top of page 10 in your handout. And this also sort of speaks to cleaning up a mess that you might have, or hearing something that you heard today and you want to quickly make a bunch of entries to your existing donor and grantor list, your customer job list. So there is a capability in QuickBooks, and I'm just going to go to my new customer job list button. So I'm right up here. So this is where I would go to add a new customer. And it's also where I would go to add a job. See how those are indented? Those are actually the grants. If you want to track specifically to a grant that you've received, those would be jobs within customer. So if I were getting a grant for the year of 2022, let's say, I would be on the parent name and I would go here and I would add a job, 2022 grant, click OK. And so I can see where that lives, and I can even change the order of that grant if I want to. I just went to that little button in front to change the order. So also, if I go to customer job button, do you see this add multiple customers and jobs? When I click that, that puts me into a form that almost looks like an Excel spreadsheet. So it's sort of like my field names are here, like name, phone number, email, and customer type. So what I want you to notice is, do you see, first you select the list that you want to do multiple entries against. Now I happen to be doing this from my customer job list. So what I can see are the other lists that are available to me for this multiple entry capability, a big time saver to do some cleanup. Do you notice I'm just looking at active customers? The second step here is columns to display, or customize columns to display. And out over here to the right is the customize column button. And I've already customized this form. So I did that earlier to prepare it for training. And you can see that QuickBooks, when I opened this file this morning, remembers my previous customization. So when I click customize columns, you can see that you could add different columns. There are lots of customer fields. I'm looking at the available columns. So let's say you wanted to quickly inactivate a bunch of customers. You could click inactive and add it as a column. And you can even order these, right? So if you wanted inactive to be the first thing on the list, you could make it your first thing, right? If email or main phone wasn't important to you, you could remove it. So this is where we customize columns for multiple entry, right? So I just click there to make them inactive. And do you see how this keeps me from going in and out of each individual customer record? So if I found that I liked the idea of being able to send a sales receipt form to a retail customer or a donor as an idea, or an invoice to a customer, but I have not been putting emails in, I could quickly do this for multiple records. This is an example here. If you decided you wanted to use a customer type field, you could come into this multiple entry, customize your columns to sort of streamline the fields that were important to you for data entry. And you could actually then go through and you could do these multiple entries. And I have to move a little window here to get down here. So when I click Save Changes, it will tell me 2 customer records have been updated, right? Those were the ones that I added that type field to. For people who have a list, let's say you had a list of customers that was separate from QuickBooks in an Excel file, you can actually copy and paste those quickly and add them into your customer list. Sometimes that happens when we're not tracking things by class correctly, and sometimes this can be helpful to get things in. So anyway, I hope that that can save you some time in doing some cleanup, even if it's just inactivating customers that are out there. Okay, so customer type, I'm trying to be conscious of the time here. I just wanted to quickly show you a report, reports, company and financial. And I'm going to do a income by customer summary. And so what I see is I see that income by customer summary. So that's showing me all of my donors and grantors. Do you like my anonymous donor that I got $25,000 from? I thought that was a nice donation. And if I go to customize that report and filter, I'm sure a lot of you know about that. We'll get into reporting in the last class, but I can actually filter by customer type. So if I wanted to, for example, just see who my donors were, I could click OK, and I could filter to donors. And we'll learn how to customize and change headers and such if you don't know how to do that, so that people know what reports they're looking at. Okay, just quickly, another kind of cleanup thing that we often have to do. An example of this is I have 2 customers that I have now identified are the same customer, and I want to merge those together. We can merge vendor records, we can merge accounts on our chart of accounts. So this is a cleanup thing that you may or may not know how to do. The decision is this. I'm looking at Cook, space George as the customer record. And I can see quite a bit of information is filled out about that customer. George S. Cook doesn't have very much filled out. Even if either one of these had transactions associated to this name, when we merge those records together, the transaction history comes with, but the customer information does not. So if I had different address information or different emails or something for George S. Cook, once I merge this name into George Cook's, that data will be gone. Transaction data will move with me. So how we merge is I'm just going to edit the customer that I I do not want to survive the merge. In the customer name field, I type in exactly the name of the surviving customer, George or Cook, comma, space George. And then what I'm going to do is click OK. The name is already being used. Would you like to merge them? Yes. So now I see the surviving name is there. Again, merging is for any name on your list. So I'm looking at the last page for today's session now, and I'm showing about 11:35 here, and it is class tracking. So class tracking, classes are your programs that you want to track. And again, I just picked up these classes from the district file that I created my training, from which I created my training file. When you go to edit preferences, like I showed you earlier, accounting, you turn class tracking on, then this will appear under the list command on your menu bar. So that's one thing that happens. The class list that I have sort of gleaned from the other company file and added some things in. So the first class that I see here is a class called admin or unrestricted, or whatever term is right for you in the districts. That is for money, for example, that might be an overhead district charge that doesn't get applied to a specific program. For example, you use an accountant, you know, and those fees, or you had to hire an attorney for something, and those professional fees, training fees are not necessarily program specific. So you can see the programs that I just used from the other company file: 4th grade ag days, outreach. So you can have subclasses of a class or a program, and you can see workshops. By using class for programs, I will be able to do a profit and loss report by class. So if I go to right-clicking like I've been doing, that's when I can create a new class, edit a class, delete a class, a new class. This is where I can create it as a subclass of. If I need to inactivate to clean it up, I can inactivate. This list is not one that is available on the multiple list. So organizations, companies, nonprofits that use class tracking, the symptom again that we see, the need for classes, is you want to track the same kind of income and expense account for multiple entities, multiple programs. So we don't want to see on the chart of an account a sub-account under workshop income, as an example, of the John Muir workshop and the MWGAC, you know, the conference that is categorized under workshops. So that is what you would see that is pointing you to class tracking. Once class tracking is turned on, then every form that you use, I just clicked on the sales receipt form, every form will open up a field for you to fill in a class. And one sort of problem that I saw in the other company file was it looked to me like admin expenses just were not classed. And if you use that technique, it will go into unclassified. QuickBooks will create that column on a profit and loss by class report. And I tend to tell my clients that I'm working with to save that unclassified column for your mistakes, or for your, I don't know where to put this yet. We will learn next week how to customize the sales receipt column to add class to the column level. So if you have the same kind of donation, or if a grant gets split into different programs, that would allow you to do that. Also, by having that undeposited funds check mark unchecked that I showed you earlier under preferences, that gives you the ability to deposit it straight into a bank account or grouping it into undeposited funds. If it's checked, this field will not be on your forms. Class tracking works through payroll for those of you who are doing payroll. Last for today, and sorry, I'm going to shut up soon. The other names list is usually where organizations keep a list of volunteer names in the other names list. Lists, other name list. And I think I just have one out there as an example. So with that, I'm through with my content for today. We have about 20 minutes that we have saved for you to ask your questions. And I'm just going to take some notes in case there's some things for me to follow up on. So have at it.
We have done a pretty good job of getting to a lot of the questions that were in the chat box. I don't know if anybody wants to raise their hand with something they thought of or put another one in there. But we do have kind of a side conversation that we were discussing about accrual versus cash for conservation districts. And it kind of seems like each conservation district uses one or the other. Chris Evans, I don't know if you're still on, and you could maybe tell me why you were mentioning you had heard we should use cash.
Yeah, I've been working for the district for 22 years almost. And I will say that the person who got me started with QuickBooks was absolutely probably the best person I've ever worked with on that. And it was her opinion as an accountant that districts should use the cash-based system because of the way we do grants, the fact that we don't get the grant, we get the reimbursement from the grant. It's been a problem with how we track grants in QuickBooks. I don't personally use the customer section at all, the customer job section at all. I do all my grant tracking through the class system. And it works fine for us. But at the time she was helping districts set up their QuickBooks files, it was all done, as far as I know, she recommended that it was all done by cash, not accrual.
And I just specifically had a board member on my finance committee that asked for me to do it by accrual because we have grants, like we have a partner position that we get reimbursed for. And when my supervisor comes in and looks at my monthly financial report, he wants to see that we didn't really lose that $6,000 that we paid in the last 2 months to payroll. We are just waiting to be reimbursed for it. So hearing those two things, Allison, does it just seem like it's a preference thing, or have any insight?
Ultimately, I think it's a call. When you send your financials to the state, and maybe there's more in online to research about what they expect in terms of a report. I think the key for you all, when it doesn't matter how you enter the transactions, it's a simple flip. So if I go to reports, company and financial, profit and loss standard, and again, I'm just going to do this fiscal year. See, this is just a flip right here. Accrual, right? And I may have a bill out there that is unpaid. We could do a balance sheet also. I just need to, so we see down here, net income is 29,294, right? Is generally that number. And when I flip it to cash, Do you see how it changed? So a cash versus accrual report is going to, depending on your transactions entered, it's going to give you a different amount because of cash being when it happens. So I think for you all, the important thing is to know which basis the report is on. You know, you can give the report however people want to see it. So it's printed here now, you know, so you know which basis that report is generated.
Oh, nice. That's a good explanation of the differences.
Yeah. So for my business, right, for my business, even though for tax purposes at the end of the year, I prepare my reports as cash basis for my accountant, throughout the whole year, I look at accrual because that's the way my brain thinks, right? I think I invoice for classes that I teach in March, and that is an income stream that's in March, even if I don't get paid for those classes until April. So I
Yep.
think whoever, I can't remember who was sharing before, it is, you know, maybe districts get grants and reimbursements in different ways, and it's however it's easiest for you to think about the numbers.
And it looks like Kay Webb just answered that she asked the state this question when she filed her first annual financial report. And they just said that you make sure that you kind of pick one and go with it for reporting basis. They're not asking for one or the other, of course, to make it really clear.
That's kind of interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
It almost sounds like, you know, a cash versus accrual for a profit-based business is an IRS determination based on your business type. It's tax law. You know, it's not like we just get to pick. You know, like my accountant told me that I'm cash basis. And so what that means to me is if I generate income my fiscal year is a standard fiscal year. So let's say I invoice in December for an invoice and I don't get paid until January. I don't pay taxes in the December fiscal year. Let's say that was 2020. I don't pay taxes on that $1,000 in 2020. I pay taxes on it in the following year. So a lot of people feel like, wow, that's pretty good. But the downside of cash is if I never get paid for that $1,000 work that I did, I can't write it off as an expense to bad debt, even though I provided that. I never paid taxes on it, so I can't expense it. You can if you're accrual, right? If I were for tax purposes accrual, I would pay taxes on that $1,000 in the year of 2020, even if I hadn't been paid. And if I never get paid for it in 2021, then my accountant would say, let's charge that off to bad debt this year. You've been holding that, you know, receivable for 10 months. So let's charge it off to bad debt.
Oh, man. I didn't realize that there were some districts that didn't use bars. I'm looking in the chat here. I started 5 years ago, and I was told when I started that we had to use bars, but you know.
Can I just put in there on the bars thing? This
Yeah.
is Chris again. As far as I'm concerned, the bars makes the Department of Administration report that we do whenever we're supposed to do it. Some of us do it in June, some of us do it in December. It makes that report a whole lot simpler because you just print 5 forms, fill out the middle line, sign it, and send it in. There's no filling in the form that you have to do if you do the bars chart of accounts. But I don't think we're required to use it.
Oh, yeah. good things to get out in the open.
Good. You know, and it can be helpful. And I don't know, you know, what kind of sharing you do. But again, if Chris, you feel like you have a QuickBooks chart of accounts based on the bar's numbering scheme, I mean, you can export that from your company file using that file utilities command. It's an IIF file. And then, or even just export it as a PDF report, right? And attach it to an email to somebody who wants to see what yours looks like. You know, and you could customize the columns if that's helpful for people to do that sharing, because it sounds like, you know, it's a time saver for certain reports you're required to do.
Right, exactly. And I've actually helped a couple of districts start through the process of converting to the bars with our company file, because the way they've got the bars stuff set up at the local government services section, it's pretty general. And then you can customize the sub accounts underneath each main account to make it make sense for your own district. I will say that when I started, I inherited a company. Actually, I inherited 4 companies that were the 4 accounts, and they were a mess. And I had a 5 or 6 page chart of accounts that now is like 2 pages because I've made so many inactive. And doing that conversion to the bars chart of accounts really helped with that, because it clarified which ones I really need and where things should go. It made my books a whole lot simpler. So
Sounds like a great thing to share.
Totally. Think seeing some more of this stuff. And then there was one other question, and just for our purposes, maybe I should have asked this a lot sooner. I apologize. But what is the specific difference? I know that you had the definition of customer, which is a grantor or a donor. What's the specific definition of vendor? Is that something you're also going to get into later on?
Oh, I can get into it right now.
Okay.
So a vendor, and I'll just go to my vendor center. A vendor is someone that you will owe money to. Okay, that's different than a credit card, right? A credit card, if you have those on your districts, those would be set up on your chart of accounts as a credit card type of an account. And we'll see this next week, enter credit card charges against that credit card type of an account, that liability. So a vendor is someone that gives you terms that you pay later. A vendor name on the vendor list opens up all that accounts payable side reporting against that vendor name. So for example, if you go to Murdoch's to buy something that you need, some kind of supply or item, and you pay Murdoch's at the point of sale, right? You know, you use your debit card or whatever you're using for payment. So Murdoch's, if you never owe them money, they could be an other name, right? Because you don't need any of that accounts payable reporting. Other names are, you know, like volunteers go on other name lists. Costco could be an other name if you go to Costco to buy office supplies or something like that for your district, because you don't really owe them, you know, a balance. You don't have terms with them. You don't need accounts payable reporting. It's not a mistake to make Murdoch's a vendor, even if you never get like a statement from them that you have to pay at the end of the month, something like that. Other names can be converted to, you know, customers vendors, employees. But once you make a name, a customer or a vendor, you can't change them from that list. They're pigeonholed into either the accounts payable or the accounts receivable side of your books.
Thank you for that description. You helped answer the question.
Okay.
Well, I'm not seeing many other questions. We do have about 6 more minutes. Is there anyone else that even has a thought or anything that you'd like to share? I know that we just probably blew a lot of people's minds. Maybe
Uh-oh.
not.
That
I don't
wasn't
know.
my intention.
Oh, I know. No, not. I mean, I know. The first time I went to your class, Allison, though, you really did blow my mind because I had never done any of this stuff before. And so just learning even these basic definitions and learning the way things could be was really helpful for me.
Good.
So
Well,
I
I
only
hope
mean
this-
that in the best way.
Okay. Well, I hope this was a good refresher for you.
Yeah, I just wrote down like 7 things that I was like, oh no. And just so everybody knows, the company file she used was mine. And I set it
I
up
wasn't
having,
gonna give that up, Heidi.
I know, I set it up having no knowledge of any of this stuff. And so I really like going through and having you be like, oh, this could have been like that. Oh, that's really good. So,
Well, certainly if you made that mistake, others have too. So, it's probably best not to start out with something that is perfect. And it's never perfect, right?
yeah, totally. Well,
So
I feel
I
like-
just have a question, I would like some feedback. I'm hoping what I'm covering is helpful. Are people learning out there? Does this feel like a good direction? Are you going to come back tomorrow?
Definitely coming back tomorrow. That was really great. Thank you so much, Allison.
Okay, good. Thank you for the feedback. I appreciate that. I sort of created this in a bit of a vacuum, so I'm hoping that it's connecting on some levels.
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, I think so many of us run our QuickBooks differently than we all do things a little differently. And that's the beautiful thing about QuickBooks is you can make it work for your situation, how you choose to. I think what people seem to get stuck on though, is that the way they do it is the way everyone should do it. And I mean, my books were set up so long ago that I wouldn't change them now.
Right.
Like I say, I don't use the customer section at all. All my people are under vendors. It makes the whole 1099 thing at the end of the year a whole lot simpler. I don't invoice out of QuickBooks because of just personal preference. So I think, remembering that everybody's set up a little different is a good thing.
Yeah, QuickBooks is, incredibly flexible, which is why it's popular, right? And yeah, it's amazing that districts can use it, and food trucks use it, and scissor sharpeners use it, and larger corporations who are assembling automated control panels for utility companies use it. So it is kind of an amazing product, and it's interesting that we have these different product lines for different sizes. So I think I have one item that I'll try to do some research on, and it is, if you didn't pick nonprofit initially with the Premier version, how to go back and fix that. So I think that that's the one thing that I have on my list, unless somebody already Googled it and figured it out.
I'll take that as a no.
Okay.
You're getting some good feedback here in the chat box as well.
Oh, great.
Extremely
you.
helpful. Our books need a lot of work, and this helps so much. Teresa's learning things, even. That's great. Cool. Well, man, I feel like we're dead on
Good.
for
Okay.
timing.
Well, thank you, everybody, for your time this morning. And I hope to see you again tomorrow morning, and we'll continue on with the second session. So I'll see you then.
Thank you so much, Allison. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. And Heidi, can you hang out there for just a minute?
Absolutely.